Yes, I was actually just thinking if we could try to find out, maybe even with some backing by some philosophical school of thought or some philosophical theories about this question of when something is appropriate versus when it isn't appropriate, maybe even more generally. So there are very different kind of scenarios that spring to mind. So I don't know, sexual advances. Sometimes in some circumstances they are appropriate, in many circumstances they are not appropriate. Or trying to convince someone of your religious conviction, in what circumstances is it appropriate or not. Or also, for example, talking about asking someone's salary. Also maybe these are then culturally different depending on where you live, or giving someone advice about their diet if you see that they are eating very unhealthy food. Or just in general, I think this question of appropriateness is a very interesting one.
Yes, I agree. It's an interesting and an important one. And I think that when people are in a situation and somebody comes up to them and try to convince them of a position, for instance, and the person who is confronted comprehends that this situation is inappropriate, it seems that he knows that there is something about the situation which makes it inappropriate for them to come in and try to convince them. So it seems that there are some principles which people comprehend, which perhaps we could flesh out by discussing them explicitly.
Yes, that would be very interesting, because I think, for example, I was just thinking, maybe if you let's say you find some woman attractive and you would like to approach her, then there are certain situations in which this is appropriate and there are certain situations in which it isn't. For example, in the middle of a funeral ceremony, it wouldn't seem to be appropriate. And I was just thinking, maybe this is because we are here in a circumstance which is kind of heavily tilted towards a different kind of emotion. And maybe many people are at the moment kind of not collectively, but simultaneously, most of these people will be simultaneously experiencing grief, I guess, in a funeral ceremony. And so then it might be inappropriate to perform some action which would evoke a completely different emotion or which you would expect that it would evoke a completely different emotion in many people.
Right, yes. I think people would say that what is essential when it comes to funerals is that let's say that you are telling people a joke at the funeral is disrespectful of the situation. So there is an object of respect in that funeral, which is the person who is deceased, the person, and then sort of about honoring that person. So I think people will say that the inappropriateness is based on a very concrete, clearly conceived thing, which is honoring the deceased person and honoring and respecting his life and the fact that he is no longer among us. So it sort of, that is the object of that inappropriateness, to put it that way.
Yes, I kind of agree with what you said, but I also just ask myself if you could say that something being inappropriate or not has to do with respecting the internal processes of the people around you. Because it might be that it's not actually the fact of this other person or that their life has ended, which is what is to be respected, but that many people are in this moment in a state of contemplation, maybe about life and death, about the finality of life and the unchangingness of it. And also they are remembering a person that they cherished, and they are maybe sad that this person is now no longer among them. And so these are internal emotional processes, if you so want, that many people in this funeral probably will be experiencing, or at least I can expect that many people in this situation are experiencing this kind of a process. And then if I just tell a joke, or I don't know, tell someone the news or something, then I would disrespect this internal process of theirs, because I would interrupt it with something completely unrelated.
Yeah, I would sort of agree, at least to a certain extent, because it seems very true that those who have known the deceased person and are grieving over the fact that he's dead, the family and relatives, it is also a good thing to honor them or respect them for the fact that now they have lost a close relative. So I think there is, you could say, it's a dignity which is due to those people, which must be respected and honored. So I wouldn't put so much emphasis on the fact that they are experiencing an emotion, but rather that there is a dignity that arises from the fact that they have lost a close relative. So the emotions would, I suppose, be relevant, but it would be that respect of them, which is sort of the essential thing, I would say.
But I was just thinking, if we turn the situation around, if we are, for example, this happened to me once. We were sitting comfortably at a lunch with some people. It was like a small party. Some people were invited, and we were having lunch, and it was kind of pleasant and funny and a little bit joking around. And then some guy showed me a Facebook post about the death chambers of Auschwitz, like a picture where people scratched with their fingernails on the wall as they were dying. And I got angry at this person, and I said, don't show me this now. I don't want to see this right now. I'm having lunch here with a couple of friends. And so it seemed also to me to be inappropriate in this moment, because it was very much contrary to the general mood of the situation.
And this happened in real life?
Yes.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that would be inappropriate. That seems very true, because then you are introducing something which is against the entire tone and the atmosphere of what you are engaged in, if you could put it that way. So it seems, I suppose one could say that it's about the situation is based on a certain setting or tone or atmosphere, and that is sort of defining how people behave in that situation. And people are not like explicitly declaring that this is the atmosphere we are engaged in. It's simply assumed, it's accepted implicitly. So but if people like that guy who showed the picture of the death chambers in Auschwitz, in the Holocaust phenomenon, then they are attacking something, this atmosphere, this setting, this tone, and people just immediately understand that, well, you're introducing something which contradicts the defined atmosphere of this scenario. Yes, it's true, we haven't explicitly said that this is the tone, but it's implicit, everyone simply comprehends it.
Yes, and I think that's very interesting. And the thing is, if you are, because I think, I'm not an expert on this, but I think there are people who have a more or less hard time, or even cannot kind of experience emotions like other people. So this goes in the direction of psychopathy. And they wouldn't kind of because if you are a normal person, I would say, then you would just feel that this general tone or atmosphere of the situation is, for example, a very happy and very light atmosphere where people are just kind of making jokes and enjoying their time together, and it's not really very grave and serious matters that are being discussed. And then perhaps it also has something to do with the fact that if 10 people around you are experiencing some kind of more or less similar emotion or atmosphere, and you charge in with something very different, then you are basically trying to force all of these other people to switch their mood to suit your own mood. And that might be the inappropriate thing, because it's kind of intrusive, because you say, okay, now all of you 10 people here, stop having a good time, stop being merry and funny, and now be very grave and serious because I want to talk about Auschwitz. Which it's intrusive, because you are taking away the pleasure of many people you want many people to adapt to yourself.
Yes, that's a good point. That's a good point. It seems to be the case that in that atmosphere you have a common good, a good that is common to the participants, but then you involve yourself and simply remove that common good, almost as if you steal it away and replace it with a good that simply you yourself enjoy at the expense of the others, which is inappropriate. So yes, that seems to be a logical description of such a scenario. Now, I would also mention that sometimes it can be justified to do such a thing, to change the atmosphere. Let's say that you have a party with some friends, and then, or perhaps it's better analogy to say that you have a very nice and funny conversation with some siblings of yours. And then one of you says to the others, I just got a call, our aunt just passed away in the hospital. Then of course that would be changing the mood significantly, but that's justified because now you're bringing in some news that are very recent, and you need to react to that, or you need to know about this. Or let's say there's an emergency that, sorry guys, we have to do something else, it's an emergency, the building is on fire, you have to get out, and you have to be very serious now. Obviously that's justified, so just also mentioning that. But if you are changing the mood without any good reason, then of course it's inappropriate, because you're just taking away a common good and not replacing it with a better one. You're just taking away it and replacing it with a egoistic thing that isn't necessary at all.
Yes, I like your reference to the common good. I think that is probably exactly the point here. And of course, I also agree that if an external emergency or just an external change in the environment forces a change in, or forces to abandon this common good of this atmosphere that is there at the moment, then of course that is everyone would see that is justified. Also, if you are at the funeral and all of a sudden a lion comes into the room or into the graveyard, then yeah, you should change your mood really quickly. But yeah, so I agree there, and I also agree that the thing where people would be annoyed is if you remove their common good in order to insert something egoistic that just you yourself want right now. And it's also interesting that many of these different moods can have a value to people. So in some settings, there is a value of having a common mood or atmosphere of grief. And in other settings, there is a value in having a common atmosphere of joy, or maybe a common atmosphere of reverence, or of talking about spiritual questions, or also a common atmosphere of talking about very material questions like do you want to eat pizza or broccoli or whatever. But I think also that these moods, they kind of shift naturally by themselves, because you can't just grieve forever. So there is a time of grief, and then perhaps it shifts when you go to the train station, and then you start talking about other things. So I think maybe something that would be inappropriate would be to try to force this natural development of this common atmosphere into a direction that you yourself want, or to force the topic of discussion into a place where you want to have it, instead of allowing this group dynamic to unfold naturally.
Yes, that's true. And those are, you could say, some principles of informal conversation. If you have an informal conversation with some friends, it is natural that the topic moves from one place to another. And I myself might confess that sometimes that have been a little bit frustrating, because we might have discussed one topic, and then I've thought about it, and then I had a very, very good point and remark. But unfortunately, it was too late, because now the topic had moved to some other topic. So it would therefore be strange or inappropriate to talk about it now, because we have already moved on. So those happen sometimes, but it seems to be one of the informal rules of conversation, I suppose.
Yes, I think that's a very good example that you brought up here, like the example that we are in at the moment. And I agree, and I know this problem, that sometimes there is something that you would want to say, but the conversation has already moved away, and now it's seems no longer appropriate. And I also know, especially a bit in past times, I sometimes tried quite forcibly to control the direction of a conversation, or to then pull it back and bring it back to this topic which I wanted to talk about. And this, yeah, sometimes then also led to inappropriate or kind of uncomfortable situations. And I know this problem, and I also think that in some parts this struggle is natural, that you can never, there is no such thing as being perfectly appropriate all the time. You will kind of, it's like kind of having different forces pulling in different directions, and you are also in there and pulling a little bit, but maybe not too hard, and it's kind of a balancing act.
Right, yes, that might be true. And also I just had a thought that one could say that in such a scenario where the topic just moves on, even though you might have a good point afterward, but it's inappropriate, if the focus was to find the truth in that conversation and it was important, then it seems that it wouldn't be inappropriate to bring up a point afterward, but it is. So one could perhaps argue that therefore we discover that the point or the end or function of such an informal conversation is not actually to find the truth of a specific intellectual topic, but just the act of engaging in a conversation with others in itself, that simply to engage in a discussion or simply to talk with people in a social setting, that in and of itself is the end, and not the specific topic itself, or else it would be appropriate to talk very, very strictly and intellectually about something, if you understand what I mean.
Yes, I think that's a good point, and I would completely agree, because, for example, if you meet for a business meeting or for a philosophical discussion about a predefined topic, and everybody comes to this place to talk about this topic, then it would be inappropriate to just talk about other things. Then everybody is expected to focus on this intellectual matter at hand, and also nobody would be would be angry or feel it inappropriate if you later come back to this conversation and want to add something, or maybe write an email afterwards and say, I also thought about this is also important, because it's actually concerned with the subject question and not just the interaction itself. And I also think, and this is maybe the less the not so nice aspect, that sometimes the unspoken or the unspoken purpose of a conversation is also kind of to establish dominance. So some people feel like, or in some settings, and I also know this myself, that sometimes it's kind of like a little bit a wrestling, who can control the situation and who can have the last word, make someone else look stupid, and then move on so that the other person cannot make a retort. And this is also, I think, a way in which people sometimes try to show dominance over someone else.
That sounds a bit like a little bit negative form of perspective when it comes to informal conversations. Yeah, I would perhaps put it another way and say that in such a setting, it is a goal to show that you are really engaged in the conversation, and so that you really have something to contribute. You have something to show to others that you have social skills or whatever, which the other can then perceive and understand. So perhaps not necessarily dominate, but at least show that you are a fruitful part of the conversation, to put it that way. And yes, and sometimes also a way of gaining acceptance in the conversation might be to, let's say, you tell them a good story or a funny joke that everyone around you laugh at. Then that's an example of how you could really show that you really have something to contribute to the conversation. You are putting forward a good as a part of the common good. And that is something that people, that is valuable in and of itself in such a setting.
That's very nice. I like that what you have said now. I think because I don't really like small talk, and I've never also particularly cared to become good at it. I always thought it useless and annoying, but I like this perspective that you have described, that it might be just you're basically advertising your own capability of being an interesting or fruitful conversation partner. So it's not yet having an interesting conversation, but it's just kind of people getting to know each other and trying to find out, okay, who might be an interesting conversation partner. And so you show if you can understand these moods and know what is appropriate or not, and then also contribute something interesting or entertaining or positive to the common good, as you said, then this shows the other people that you are actually a worthwhile conversation partner. And I would say that this form of informal conversation would be following a different purpose than the one that I described before with the trying to dominate. I think these are two different settings, though both can occur in informal conversations.
Right. Yes, when it comes to that's a very good point which you brought forward there. I think when it comes to domination, I think that can actually be at least sometimes a bad thing in a conversation, because you want to let others speak as well, or else they would just feel excluded. You want others to participate, or else they wouldn't like being part of it if they just listen to you and don't speak themselves. But be an energetic person who is really engaged in the conversation and fruitful, that seems to be a very huge value. And there is this thought I just had about what the purpose of such a conversation, or the essence of a social conversation, is, like small talk. And perhaps we can understand it as being a form of art. That is how we understand social conversation. It's an art that you train yourself to become good at. There is a natural essence of it, a natural way you can sort of flow the conversation, a way that is sort of making the small talk or the conversation become a good thing. So perhaps it could be viewed as art, and in that way it's a thing that you learn to master over time, and you gain skills and you train yourself to master this art in a way. So what do you think of viewing social conversation as an art?
I think I could agree that it can be maybe viewed as an art. I was just also thinking that, as all other moods, also this mood of just informal conversation is also maybe it should be temporarily restricted. So some people, for example, there might be an evening where the entire evening only consists of small talk, and then it kind of becomes oppressive in itself, because then there might be some custom or some person who tries to hinder the conversation from moving towards more important or deeper matters, that you artificially keep it always on the surface, and that then would also not be good. So I think I would agree that it is a kind of art, and that I should not view it as negatively as I tend to view it. But then I guess it will also, if it's left naturally, then it will soon evolve into some other form of conversation. Whereas if it's just kept very almost like by force on the surface, then it will also become something bad.
Right, yes, that's a good point. And I also had this thought that sometimes even a small talk can become a very deep intellectual conversation, where the topic actually is to dive into the deep truths about the specific issue, especially when there are very few people involved. If there are a lot of people involved, then it seems to be very superficial. But let's say you have only 2 people. They might both be interested in a topic, and when they touch upon this topic, they could perhaps dive really deep into it for a long time. And one of them could say, "Yeah, tell me more. This is very interesting." And the other just explain, and then the topic become very intellectualized, if that's a word. And it seems to me that also even in the Platonic dialogues, I think some of the conversations or dialogues that Socrates has with some other Greek people start out as small talks. If I remember correctly, I think even the Republic, the greatest philosophical work by Plato, or one of the greatest works, which presents this very, very comprehensive view of the state and of the soul and justice. I think that starts off as a small talk, and then it evolves into one of the most influential and greatest philosophical dialogues of all time. So of course those dialogues are fictional, but still I think that it's interesting to consider.
Yes, I agree. And I think it might be that also one purpose of small talk is not only to get to know each other, the conversation partners, but also to kind of explore the terrain, and then maybe at some point decide where you want to go in deeper. Or not just you, but all of the people who are involved, kind of, okay, we could talk a little bit about this, or about this, or about this, and then at some point you start to go in deeper into one topic. And I think your observation with Plato's works is interesting, because I guess philosophy probably grew out of conversations, and it was probably considered a kind of art form to have a good philosophical conversation. And that would include how the conversation starts. So I think that's an interesting observation.
Yes, I think that's really interesting to consider. And yeah, it seems to be the case that when you have informal conversations at a party or you have some company, there are indeed some rules that you have to be aware of, some customs that you need to follow. And this is, by the way, something that parents should teach their children, that, okay, my dear son or daughter, there will be situations where they have to do small talk and informal conversations, and then they teach them how to behave in such situations. It's a sad thing to witness that there are many people who grow up without learning many customs and social rules by their parents, and therefore that might lead to uncertainty or insecurity when you are at parties or some other occasion. And I think it's really important to learn those, so you know how to master situations and follow the rules of what is appropriate and not, and how to be, for instance, liked by those around you, or at least have a good tone and atmosphere. So that's also something I could mention.
Yes, I would agree. And as we said, there are different situations with different maybe rules or customs, and it's probably very important for your interaction in society that you learn to navigate these different situations. And yes, there was also an interesting topic that came up in my mind before, and that is the topic of humor. And I was wondering if we could say that humor has to do with navigating the boundaries between these different atmospheres or moods. So that, because oftentimes when you tell a joke, it is somehow fixed in this setting where you are at the moment, but it also has a touch of a different setting. And a good joke might be one that is just touching the boundary of what is still appropriate. It's just not going too far, but it's going very close to the boundary, and that people enjoy to see when someone knows how to navigate the social terrain very precisely and very well, and therefore he can make such a statement that goes right to the boundary of what's still appropriate, and then that would be maybe humor.
That's a very interesting and good observation. Yes, perhaps we could say that if you make a really good joke, it's a sign that you have really mastered the situation. So that's a very good way of looking at it. And I was thinking not that many minutes ago that there is this question of what is the essence of humor? What is it that really makes people laugh at the joke? What makes a joke funny and not? And this is something I've been thinking about sometimes, and I haven't really found a very good, satisfying answer. But perhaps it has to do with something that you just mentioned, that it is about stretching boundaries to the degree that it is reasonable, to put it that way. It is a way of taking the social conversation and the mutual understanding that the participants of the conversation have. You grasp that, and you take that, and you sort of change it in a way that makes a new and refreshing, perhaps it's a way to say it, way of thinking or thought or idea or suggestion. So yes, it's a very the concept of joking about something, making something funny. It seems that is an art in and of itself, which people can master to different degrees.
Yes, I would completely agree that good humor is an art, and I, like you, I have never been able so far to fully understand why is something funny and what makes something funny. And I think it might really be that something like a good joke kind of displays that you are very adept or very well and fine-tuned towards kind of playing with this social dynamic, that you feel the situation correctly and you feel the general mood correctly, and then you are well versed in this art of kind of playing with this social mood and kind of pulling it a little bit in this direction or a little bit in the other, but not too far so that it becomes intrusive, but still, yeah, you are kind of playing with it, I think.
Yes, that's a very good way to put it. That makes very much sense, that you understand and grasp an understanding in that social setting, and you play with it, basically. Yes, that seems to be a very good way of understanding it. So it seems that comedians who are on stage and they make all these jokes and people laugh at them, you could say that those are really mastered the play field. They are mastered all the different customs and understandings and rules of engaging with one another, and manage to just play with them all the time and make joke after joke after joke. So I think that seems to be a really interesting art that people can master. And if you really master it and make many good jokes, that's a way to make people like you. It seems, at least in practice, that's a way people will remember you in a conversation.
Yes, that's very interesting, because I think, as we said, oftentimes people are social animals, and so I guess if you are a social animal, then you will instinctively desire to understand these social dynamics and to be able to navigate them well. And if you then see someone or observe someone who just does this really perfectly, who has mastered this art, then you will enjoy observing this, because you can learn something for yourself, because by observing, you too learn how to navigate social interactions or social situations a little bit better and more smoothly, or more yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That's a very good point. And also, on a more general note, perhaps you can also reflect to what extent there are so many implicit rules and understandings and expectations in social situations, that there are so many things that simply people know that lies in the air, that aren't explicitly declared to be so. Just like we talked about an atmosphere or a tone that a group of friends have when they sit and talk about something. Social life involves a lot of rules and customs that people simply assume and follow without ever, or hardly ever, explain or explicitly declare, but people simply grasp them. So that's something interesting or fascinating about human social life, the massive amount of I was almost going to say invisible customs, but at least implicit customs that simply they are out there, and either you grasp them or you don't, and you might be able to train yourself to master them. But that's sort of a skill. I suppose this is what is referred to as the social intelligence, the degree to which you grasp all these implicit understandings in social life.
Yes, and I think this fits nicely to something that I was just thinking right now, which is that I think also one aspect of humor is sometimes a growing tension can arise between all of these implicit rules or expectations or customs and kind of what human nature requires. And then if someone really grasps this tension and kind of can release it by making a very well-placed joke that just expresses this contradiction between the implicit norms or rules and maybe some aspect of human nature that many people might be thinking at the moment but not daring to express, then this might also be a very successful joke, and then people will find that very funny because it kind of yes, it kind of exposes maybe these implicit expectations or maybe some implicit hypocrisy in the setting.
Yeah, so sort of that people that when they hear the joke, they discover such a phenomenon, if I understand you correctly.
No. For example, I don't know, if somebody takes themselves a little bit too seriously, but they are, for example, the host of this event, and so there is kind of a conflict between that you should kind of respect the host of the event, but also people feel more and more kind of a little bit of annoyance because this person is putting themselves too much in the center. Then if someone succeeds in expressing this tension very well in a joke, which is really funny, then I think that the reason why it is funny is because he expressed this tension so well, but at the same time, not explicitly, but also implicitly. You're just making the tension visible to everyone, and then people are kind of relieved because they were all feeling this a little bit, but now it's kind of out.
Right, yes, out in the open.
Yes. And against a good joke, you can almost not be angry. So even if you would maybe tell this person also implicitly, hey, you're putting yourself too much in the center, maybe you should just speak a little bit less, then he can't really be angry at you because the joke is kind of doing it in a non-confrontational way in some sense.
Yes, that's a very good that's a good point. And if you manage to do that, then you show that you have really mastered an art, to put it that way.
Yes, exactly. It's this art of moving and playing with the atmosphere or the social mood or the social situation.
Yes, exactly. It's a way also of commenting on something or someone that might be explained in a disrespectful way one way, but if you do it as a joke, that might be in a completely acceptable way. So it's really interesting how a joke could be really presenting something in a good and unproblematic way. That's a fascinating aspect of it, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes, that's true, because if you would just say to this person, look, you are starting to go on my nerves, you're talking so much, then it would be very confrontational and it could lead to very uncomfortable situations. But if you if you can do it with a good joke, then it's really kind of, you just take the weapon out of the other person's hand, but still you change the situation, and it's kind of, yeah, you can't really say anything. There is no retort or no. Yes, it's almost like just the tension has settled naturally. It's like if you have for example, like I don't know, a steep hill, and then you have a river in the bottom, and then there is almost, the water is taking away some earth and there is more and more erosion, and then the tension in the hill becomes more and more, and then at some point it just settles down, and then achieves a new state which is more stable, and kind of a good joke can do the same thing in a social setting, I think, because you can't really go back anymore.
Right. Yes. And one could say that a joke could either could rescue a situation from becoming awkward.
Yes, yes, and it's very fascinating because I don't still fully understand it, because you can somehow do this, and if you do it with a with a really good joke which fits in the situation, then it's almost like you can save a very difficult situation without any negative consequences for anyone.
Yes, exactly. It's a great means to make a good thing out of a awkward thing, or potentially awkward thing. Sorry if I interrupted.
No. And I think it is truly also an art form, because I think this is more just some people have a very fine feeling for the social situation and a very good intuition about about how they can, yeah, manipulate it or adapt it. And I think this it's really a skill or an art, and that's why it's enjoyable to watch it. So it's not so much to do with like philosophical concrete understanding, but it's more just, yeah, like a painter is well at manipulating paint on a canvas, and a comedian is well at manipulating just the social dynamic in the room.
Yes, exactly. So it could be truly spoken of as art, because it is that, and it's something you could study by just observing how do, say, comedians or funny people at a party, what kind of jokes do they tell, what is the situation, and one could sort of study those instances of joking and learn something from it. That's also interesting.
Yes, I think you can definitely learn it by practice and by observation. Though I was just also a little bit what's the right word? I just realized that this is not my best field of expertise, because I'm always studying the things in the way that we are now, in the philosophical way, but I'm not in that sense an artist in performing it, but I'm more trying to understand it and then explain it.
Yes, I suppose I am sort of in the same situation myself when it comes to comes to these things. Yeah.
Yes, but philosophers are also needed and have their place in society. So
absolutely, we cannot be forgotten.
No, no. It takes all the different skill sets. So yes, that was very interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Indeed, very interesting and good topic to discuss. So
yes, so I think for me this is enough material for the day. Yeah, it was interesting and was enjoyable, so it was really cool.
yes, indeed. So thank you very much for these very good and fruitful conversations that we had today. And
yes.
if this will be the ending of the recording, then I also wish the audience a great Wednesday.